Ex Machina, Dread, Sunshine, 28 Days Later, The Beach. Not a bad list of films, and all written by the British author, screenwriter and movie director Alex Garland. Which makes it all the more surprising then when I say that his latest film, Civil War, is a bit of a letdown when it comes to the story department. War movies can be difficult to get right. Focus too much on the bombs and you risk losing your audience's emotional connection. Get the personal story wrong and your audience will end up bouncing off anyway. Garland's Civil War, released on April 12th to coincide with the start of the real American Civil War 163 years ago, lands somewhere in the middle. Set in the near future, in which a civil war has erupted between the US government and secessionist states, it tells the story of Lee Smith, played by Kirsten Dunst, a war photographer who travels through the country with her journalist colleague Joel, played by Wagner Moura. The pair have set up an interview with the US's belligerent president, played by Nick Offerman, and are on their way to Washington, D.C. Just before setting off, Lee is busy photographing a protest that turns into a suicide bombing when she saves a young girl with the desire to become a photographer herself, Jessie, played by Kaylee Spaney. Somewhat unwisely, Joel invites Jessie along on their interview trip to the Capitol, as well as older, wiser journalist Sammy, played by Stephen McKinley Henderson. What follows is a meandering road trip through Civil War America, as Lee starts to question a commitment to documenting what she's seeing. But as the gang close in on Washington, so too do the secessionist forces. Will Lee and her friends make it in time to see the final showdown? And in her case, does she still really want to? The structure of Civil War borrows heavily from other war films, such as Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan and the more recent 1917 from Sam Mendes. Using the quest plot archetype from Christopher Brooker's 7 Basic Plots, it gives our main characters a mission, something they have to achieve on the other end of the battlefield, and sets them off to go and achieve it. Along the way, they get to experience everything a war zone has to offer. So far, so normal. And in this way, Alex Garland's Civil War is fantastic. The tone is always dangerous tense. There's violence or death around every corner, and the film only gives us a rest once or twice in its entire 1 hour 49 minute runtime. There are some scenes that are difficult to watch, some horrible moments. A peaceful nighttime camp is beset by exploding bombs and gunfire. A trip to the gas station becomes a big decision in case there might be hidden danger. And there's one scene creeping towards the end of the film where they're stopped by a rogue militia unit and interrogated that I put up there with the knife scene in Saving Private Ryan or Hans Lander's opening in Inglourious Basterds. It's all presented beautifully for the film's $50 million budget and paced well for the most part too. If Civil War's world belonged to a video game, something built to experience, explore, I'd be rating it very highly. Every cliche is twisted, the world building is really well presented. Even the setup for the conflict itself isn't quite what you'd expect and feels fresh because of that. Alex Garland is a careful, thoughtful writer, and you can see that in every scene. But what Saving Private Ryan and 1917 do well that Civil War doesn't is the more personal story threaded through the road trip. In Private Ryan, we have the emotional journey to fetch a mother's last surviving son. The film explores the cost of that, but that desire drags the characters through war-torn France. Same in 1917. That desperation to get the message to the upper command will save hundreds of lives. Again, emotionally important. In Civil War, the story thread Alex Garland chose to weave was Lee and Joel's interview with the president. Not only is this not heroic in that it's a personal goal unlikely to save other lives, it's also not interesting in the way it's presented. We find very little out about the president, so he's not the point of the trip. We find very little out about why Lee or Joel are so desperate to make it to DC, other than the fact it will further their careers. It all just feels empty and pointless, doesn't really say anything about the war, why it's happening, its costs. There's a heroic moment at the end which doesn't feel earned. If it wasn't for the younger Jessie tagging along trying to begin her own lifelong dream, there really wouldn't be much of an emotional angle in the story at all. Thankfully, what little character there is in the film is handled well by its actors. Kirsten Dunst is looking a little older now, and it suits the pensive nature of Lee. She's excited, shocked and saddened at times by what she's seeing, and Dunst brings it to life well. I also really enjoyed Stephen McKinley Henderson as Sammy. His character tries hard throughout to keep his fellow journalists safe and argues with them at times. The emotion Henderson puts into this really sells this point of view. Last but not least, special mention goes to Jesse Plemons. He's only in the movie for a single scene, that one I mentioned towards the end earlier in the review, but my god is it a good one, and his performance is half the reason for that. I won't say any more as it's worth seeing fresh. Rounding up, the effects are great. How some films with a budget as small as this can look this good and others with budgets that dwarf it look so bad I'll never understand. The soundtrack is absolutely spot on, weird and discordant, the tone not always matching up with what you're seeing on screen, but always interesting. And there are a few subtle moments of humour that land for the most part, even in a sea of difficult subject matter, which is no mean feat. Ultimately, I think Civil War might have been better as a TV series. It's far from a bad film and does a hell of a lot well, presenting what feels like a realistic conflict in a horrifying way, but at times it feels like a documentary. As a film, as a story, it's lacking. There are no memorable characters, nobody with anything personal at stake. A TV series would have given Alex Garland and the story more time to breathe, allowed him to explore more of the fantastic world he's created. Because of all of this, I don't think Civil War will stick in the memory too long. Still, go and see it. It's a thoughtful piece and pretty scary at times. Anyway, nothing more to say. This is Movie Maverick signing out.